Hi, everyone. We're opening the doors a little early just so folks can get situated. We will begin promptly at noon. Thank you. Thank you all for joining. We'll begin promptly at noon. Good afternoon. Welcome to Equal Justice Promoting Equality in the Legal System. My name is Alexis Alvarez Bartholomew, and I am the former Director of Statewide Training at Florida Legal Services. I'm extremely excited to have you here and be audience to this incredible panel. And I have to express extreme gratitude to our co-sponsors, the Public Interest Law section of the Florida Bar and the Women's Foundation. Without these two organizations, this wouldn't have happened, especially without the support of the Women's Foundation. So before I take over with a little more housekeeping and then move into the questions that we have here today on this exciting panel, I'm going to turn this over to Jennifer from the Women's Foundation, who was an integral part of making this happen. Jennifer, thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Alexis. We are super proud to be partnering with you today on this really important topic. So I am going to give a brief overview of what the Women's Foundation of Florida is, and then I will introduce our wonderful panelists, and then Alexis will take it away. So I am Jennifer Kryshka. I am the COO of the Women's Foundation of Florida. So we are a statewide organization that is focused on advocacy, as well as professional and civic leadership programming for girls and women in our state. Since we have, so many attorneys with us today, I'm going to mention two of our programs in particular that might be of interest to you, which is Women on the Run. It is a nonpartisan campaign training program, and then Women on the Bench, which is a program that we operate that connects, attorneys who are interested in maybe being judge someday to meet with judges and to learn more about the process. If you're interested in learning more about our work, please visit our website at womensfoundationfl.org. Information on our programs and my information is on the website as well, so feel free to contact me. So our quick housekeeping. So one, this webinar is being recorded. It's also been approved by the Florida Bar for 1.5 general and 0.5 professional CLE credits. The chat has been disabled, but we will be taking questions from all of you towards the end of our discussion. So please, if you have any questions for the panelists, put them in the Q&A, which is a feature probably at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to get through as many questions as we have time for. So I am now going to introduce our wonderful panelists. So we have former Florida Supreme Court Justice Barbara Pariente, Alexcia Cox, who is the Deputy Chief and Assistant State Attorney from the 15th Judicial Circuit, Karen Hansen, who is our Survivor Advocate with the Collective Projects, and of course, Alexis already introduced herself, and she will be moderating our panel today. So Alexis, I am turning it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And just to echo what Jennifer said, we really want to hear from you and provide your questions to our panelists at the end. So throughout the conversation, if a question does come up, please use the Q&A function. And at the end, if time permits, we will give your question that airtime. All right. Well, thank you very much to all of our panelists who are here today. I am extremely honored to share this platform with you, and I really look forward to picking your brains and understanding your opinion on equal justice and the promoting of gender equality in our legal system. So the first two questions that I'm going to throw out there will be for all of our panelists to address, and I will direct who to address first or second. But that first question that I have for you is to please tell us a little bit about yourself and explain what gender equality in the legal system means to you. Turning to Justice Pariente first, what is your answer? Ooh, and we have you on mute, Justice Pariente.
Okay.
There you go.
Delighted to be here, and I want to thank the Women's Foundation and Florida Legal Services for hosting this. I became a lawyer in 1973. Growing up, as I did in the 60s, there was no thought that I had of becoming a lawyer. My parents never went beyond high school, and actually, I became a lawyer after majoring in broadcasting and film because I learned about legal services for the poor at Harvard at the time. And I thought, wow, that would make such a difference if those that were unrepresented had a voice. And so that really drove me to become a lawyer. I have always been active in our own legal aid society in Palm Beach County. And, I'm just a big believer and advocate for that. I think that for me, what does gender equality mean? When I became a lawyer, there were 3% of the Florida bar were women. And I didn't look at the breakdown, but I am sure of the 3%, there was a minuscule number that were African American or, Latino. And it was not easy in those years. I was the first woman associate in my law firm. I had my son when in 1977, shortly after I joined the law firm, and there was no such thing as pregnancy leave. or anything that would have accommodated being a mother as well as a lawyer. I'm proud to say that my 47-year-old son is a city attorney down in Boca Raton, and he's a big supporter of gender equality. And the only thing that I would mention is that I think that when we talk about gender equality, we also have to talk about the whole issue of transgender and the discrimination that is faced for that particular cohort. And so as women, I feel like it's our obligation to promote all sorts of gender equality. So I think, again, I have 3 minutes. I hope I did it in 3 minutes.
You sure did. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And Attorney Cox, please tell us a little bit about yourself and also what gender equality in the legal system means to you.
Thank you. First, thank you for hosting this wonderful event. I think it's very relevant, and it's important that we have conversations like this. I'm truly honored to share this panel stage, if you will, with people like Karen and Justice Pariente, who have blazed trails that I'm able to walk on right now. So to tell you a little bit about myself, I've been a lawyer for 19 years in Palm Beach County. Palm Beach County is my home community, born and raised here. I went out to law school thinking that I was going to be a sports agent and make a whole lot of money, but somehow my heart settled on public service and being a prosecutor. And as a prosecutor, I've served many years as chief of our domestic violence unit, and I actually started at the state attorney's office as a baby lawyer in the domestic violence unit. And I have such a passion for domestic violence cases because, of course, as we know, it's primarily impacting women and women with children. And so being able to relate to them and to help empower them and support them through what might be the most traumatic experience of their lives it really set my career on the path of public service. This is what I chose to do. And I'm so grateful that I have the opportunity to be that voice for many of the women in our community over, a decade of my career. When I think about gender equality, I think back on being a single mother working at the state attorney's office. Again, public service. You're not making a lot of money. You're doing it because not only is it hard work, but it's heart work, and you have to have a passion for it. You have to be called to serve if you're going to be effective. And, being a single mom and making my own personal sacrifices to do that work. There weren't a lot of women who were single mothers, like me, because it was hard. It's hard. So making it a job that anyone who wants to be able to do it can do it. I think that's important to look at everyone and see everyone in their unique circumstances. I think, women are here, as Justice Pariente stated back when she started. You didn't see a lot of women, but we're here. But that still doesn't mean that we're being heard. It still doesn't mean that our voices are being amplified when we have big decisions that have to be made in respective legal organizations and legal offices. So I'm proud to be one of the lawyers that sits at the table where decisions are made at the state attorney's office. But that still doesn't mean that you always feel empowered. You always feel, the ability to say how you feel at all times. And I think it's important that we're not only seeing women, but we're hearing our perspectives, and we're celebrating our unique voices when big decisions are made, or when we're at that table. We make sure that we elevate and we amplify the women who are in the room. So to me, that's what we have to do more of. I want to see that when we're talking about gender equality in the legal profession.
Absolutely. And Ms. Hansen, tell us a little bit about yourself, and also explain what gender equality in the legal system means to you and in your experiences.
Well, like the first two women said, thank you for having me on the panel today. I feel so honored, listening to both of those intros. I feel really honored to be even grouped in with these two very powerful women. So again, my name is Karen Hansen, and I am a commercial interior designer by trade and by education. I specialize in healthcare design and have done several law offices, coincidentally, and I've been doing that for about 3 decades. I'm also the founder of the Collective Projects, which focuses on survivor advocacy. And thanks to my friend Alexcia Cox, I'm a member of the Palm Beach County Criminal Justice Commission, and I represent survivors of crime. I want to pause before I continue and just say that I know there are statistically survivors of abuse listening today. And I want to let you know I'm going to share a lot of explicit information, which may be triggering. So please exercise caution as you listen. And I might cry, you might cry, I don't know, but it's normal. That's the other thing we can talk about. Crying is normal. I am an advocate because I am a survivor of childhood sexual abuse by my biological mother and stepfather beginning at the age of 8. I'm also a survivor of college rape, which resulted in pregnancy. My child, Indigo, will be 30 years old this year. I got married when Indigo was 11, and at age 12, my husband molested Indy. I was 9 months pregnant at the time with my son, Oliver. I filed for divorce, which is when my domestic violence saga began. Eventually, I got a divorce and filed a civil case against my ex-husband on behalf of Indigo with attorney Jeff Herman, and settled out of court for an undisclosed sum, which paid for Indigo's college. That same year, my aunt, who worked in my office for 15 years, was caught embezzling money between $100,000 and $200,000. The police department wouldn't take the case because she denied all wrongdoing. They said it was more of a civil case, even though I would argue it met the necessary criteria to press charges. But I'm not an attorney, so I couldn't do anything with that. So for those reasons, I advocate for justice, and I'm grateful to share my story to help other victims, future victims, have better experiences than mine. Gender equality in the legal system to me means being treated fairly and equally and being taken seriously, even if we, as women, happen to be more emotional than a man might be in the same scenarios. And by the way, we have different scenarios a lot of times than they do. So, and they happen to be more emotional just by subject matter. Thank you.
And so, Ms. Hansen, thank you for sharing that. I think the next question should go to you off of that. So in your experience, does gender influence the outcomes of legal cases, legal systems, or even as somebody navigating the process? And if gender does affect those things, how in your experience?
I definitely do think that it influences legal outcomes. For example, if someone is sexually abused as a child, people seem to be more shocked when it's a boy. They may be more likely to be believed because statistically they're less likely to report. That could play into how and if a victim can even get access to representation and how seriously they're taken by a judge or jury in court. For example, I tried to press charges on behalf of Indigo, but we had, and I'm quoting here, no physical evidence, no witnesses, and no additional victims. So it was he said, she said. The state attorney at the time said, "I'm sorry, it's not that we don't believe you, but there's nothing we can do to help you and your child. We can't take on a case we don't think we can win." Not that this will make you feel any better, but we've had homicide cases where we knew the person was guilty, but we didn't have the evidence to prove it. She was right. That didn't make me feel better. The same thing applies to domestic violence. Men are less likely to be victims, although they still are, and they're definitely less likely to report if they are. Personally, in my domestic violence case, the police were in my house no less than 6 times before they explained what I could do to get help, what an injunction was, because normal people in civilian world, even with a college degree, don't know what an injunction is. They call it a restraining order, and no one knows how to get those because you don't ever think you'll need one. And you don't know where to go to even request one, even once you find out what an injunction is. Maybe they would have explained all of that sooner to a man, or sadly, as a victim of domestic violence, maybe they would have just laughed at him for even being a victim of domestic violence to begin with. In my embezzlement case, I can't prove I would have been taken more seriously by law enforcement if I were a man, but I think because it was business related, they didn't show a great amount of respect or concern, so I never had a chance for justice.
Thank you. And I'm interested, Attorney Cox, in your opinion on that same question, but in light of Ms. Hansen's response. Gender outcomes, or I'm sorry, how does gender outcome influence the legal system? And I imagine you have some of that insight from the other side of where Ms. Hansen's talking about being a client navigating and you being on the other side dealing with all these people who are sort of imposing those gender issues on victims, survivors, clients.
Yes, absolutely. Gender should not play a part in any outcome in our system, right? Just like race, just as money or power, influence, none of those things, should matter. But perceptions are reality. And I think it's really important to understand that someone's perception or how they may have been treated in their individual situation, you can't explain that away or dismiss that. So I believe in validating someone else's experience. I will say though, as an attorney, as a prosecutor, my job is to look at the evidence, and we look at the evidence regardless of who the victim is, who the defendant is, ages. None of those things matter for me when I'm looking at and evaluating a case and determining whether or not I can file charges, whether I can win at trial. I'm looking at the evidence that I have. And I believe that as long as we continue to do that, we will have a justice system that is fair. Justice will be blind, and we have to just be reminded of that. Now, okay, of course, if you have certain cases and you're looking at certain things through your own lens, yes, we're all human. There are some types of biases that are implicit that we may not even be aware of. And that goes for attorneys, for judges, for anyone, police. And so we just have to be aware of it and address it when we feel it or we think that it's involved in our decision-making process. And that's what I try to do. That's what I teach the attorneys in my office that I work with, that it's important when we're dealing with people to validate their thoughts and how they feel about what happened to them. And I always tell victims, survivors, listen, this is something that happened to you. I can only tell you about the law, but I'll never try to invalidate your feelings and your experience. But I also have to tell you, this is what the law says, this is what the evidence is, et cetera. And I try to make sure that it's important. They walk away with at least understanding that this is not a personal decision about them. Being a woman, they're not going to be treated any differently, and at least by me. Now, I have had situations where there have been, some women who have come to court and they've had experiences with judges or, members of the judiciary where they didn't feel that they were treated fairly because they were a woman or because, and I try to make sure that I mitigate that as much as I can, because I don't believe that that is the intention of our members of our judiciary, attorneys, because we try to make sure that our decisions are based on the evidence, the facts, and the information that's before us. But again, I can't invalidate what someone's perception is of their experience.
Right, absolutely. And that segues perfectly to ask the question to Justice Pariente. From your perspective of being on the bench and seeing things from that third impartial view, do you think that gender influence outcomes in legal cases, the legal system, whether it be through judicial decisions or how clients are represented? What is your opinion on that from your perspective? And we have you on mute again, Justice.
There used to be a thought that as a woman, on the bench, that there would be a perspective of more understanding as to especially female litigants. I can say that as a lawyer, I was always trying just to work my hardest, to do my best. And I don't really feel that on the Supreme Court, we had many, many excellent advocates who were women who did great jobs. The death penalty cases, a lot of the best advocates on both sides were women. And in my 20+ years on the Supreme Court, and also then on the appellate court, I never heard during arguments or after, oh, well, she, something that would be a negative about women. I will say this, and it's with all due respect about the importance of having women on the bench, women in the legal profession, is that Ruth Bader Ginsburg used to have a saying. She would say, when there are 9, meaning when there were 9 women on the Supreme Court. We now know that at least of the 3 women, so 3 women now, 1, 2, yeah, 3 women. There are 4 women, however many, 1 at least is certainly not representing what I would call the women's issues, on abortion or those kind of cases. On the current Supreme Court, we've seen that the 3 women are, if you take abortion rights as something that is uniquely a woman's issue, although certainly it should be everyone's issue, that reproductive freedom and privacy and your health care, they have single-handedly destroyed our privacy amendment that was in our Constitution from the 1970s. If it had been up to them, the constitutional amendment, which will go on the ballot in November for abortion rights, restoring Roe, would have not gone on the ballot. And they are talking about this, something that I had never really heard of until the oral argument with Chief Justice Muniz, fetal personhood, meaning somehow that the fetus has equal rights to the woman who's bearing the child. So I think the important thing is, and I don't know what the breakdown here is today, but is to make sure that in our training, that we are training men as well as women to understand the perspective, whether it's in domestic violence, because Karen, it upsets me to hear this. We used to do, and I assume we still do, a lot of domestic violence training for judges. I was very instrumental in starting the Unified Family Court, where cases where they're linked, because a lot of times you'll see children that are abused and then they go into the delinquency system because of the trauma that they've experienced, that those cases need to be seen together. So I would hope that we would have a renewed effort on the part, at least for our judiciary, of training in these issues, including gender specific cases. So anyway, so I think it's something that we as men and women have to understand. And also when we talk about gender equality, transgender voices as well, and what discrimination they face, and we need to advocate for them.
Absolutely. And I think you make a very good point that, it's not like, okay, I identify with this particular gender, therefore I believe in all of these same things, right? Like we've learned in life that everybody is created with, everybody has a mixture of opinion and feeling and life experiences. So just to say, okay, I'm a woman, that means I'm going to support women, that's a fallacy. It doesn't exist. And you answered my follow-up question, which was going to be, how do we fix that? And it's, like you said, sharing those, the education behind those values. Attorney Cox, did you have something that you wanted to share?
Well, I wanted to add the perspective of a legal practitioner, and I'm sure Justice Pariente might have something to say about this as well, because, I mentioned earlier that, yes, you see the women, we're here, but there have been occasions where, let's say you're a woman and you're in court and your opposing counsel might be a man, someone who speaks louder, maybe is a little more forceful. And, there have been occasions where, and I've spoken about this with other women through organizations like Florida Association for Women Lawyers and women's groups, navigating that. We have to have those conversations, but what do you do when that happens? And I don't know, and I can't speak for men. Maybe they have those conversations as well. I don't know, but I know that we have them as women. Well, what's the best way to respond to that type of situation when you're in court? You don't want to come across as being, aggressive, but you also want to show your strength and that you are not scared of a fight or to push back. And, you know, sometimes I've been in those situations where it's gone really well, and I think a judge understands and respects the fact that I'm punching back a little bit. And then other times I've been told to pipe down, you know, and all I'm doing is trying to just show that I'm assertive and that I'm right. And I want you to hear me as much as you hear opposing counsel. And so as women, you know, just taking it to the other side, when we're talking about as practitioners, and I believe there are some legal practitioners on here, we also have that thought in our head about how we navigate those challenges. And it can be tough. It can be tough.
Yeah. Justice Pariente, were you going to say
No, I
something?
was just going to think that part of this is such a good exchange that maybe we might want to suggest something to the judiciary as far as hearing from people like Karen or Alexcia about these things. I mean, there's an anecdote that I used to love telling, not love, but, you know, early in my practice, one of my partners, referring attorney had thought I was his secretary. And I would tell that story until my dear friend Peggy Quince, who is like very close friend, would say that when she started practicing law in Virginia and she was in her best suit and looking very professional, the judge thought she was the defendant. And so you talk about circumstances that influence how someone sees the world. And we have got to be, you know, very sensitive to what biases, you know, might be there based on their own background. And one thing I would say is we have, again, another thing that the judiciary has done is training in adverse childhood experiences, which Karen, you have several of those factors and how that influences someone going forward. When we had a seminar for judges and they did a finder where they wouldn't identify who they were, it was an astonishing number of judges that had several adverse childhood experiences. So we don't screen for that when we look for who's going to be, quote, the best judge, but to understand that these judges are coming with their own set of biases shaped by their own experiences. So that's a hard thing, but I think sort of calling it out is one way to make sure that they're aware and they're aware of what they're doing.
Right, absolutely. And that segues well into Karen. I want to reopen the floor for you to talk about, I know you told us a bit about your experience and the challenges that you faced, but can you share your story with us about the challenges you faced as a woman navigating the legal system, and also share with us a bit how those challenges impacted your case and your life? Because as you said, you were perceived, a certain way off the bat. And, I'm sure that really affected your experience.
Yes, definitely. If it's okay, I'd like to start with the challenges that began when I was a little girl. So I want to go all the way back for just a minute. Most of you may know this, I don't know, but 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys are sexually abused before they turn 18. And 90% of the time, it's by someone they know and trust. So that, at a young age, is a challenge. When it's someone you love and respect, you don't know for sure that what they're doing is wrong, and it doesn't always hurt when it's abuse. That's a common misconception, I would say. And you don't know where to turn for help. You don't know it's against the law. You don't know who is around to even help you. So we need better education for children when it comes to what sexual abuse is, how they can protect themselves in the moment it's happening or potentially happening, and who statistically abusers are. As a 21-year-old, I was raped by my friend's boyfriend when he was walking me home after we'd all gone out drinking one night. The challenge was I was drunk and he wasn't a total stranger, so I blamed myself instead of him. Back then, there was also no such thing as acquaintance rape like there is now, so I never told anyone or reported to law enforcement. With Indigo's sexual abuse case, I reported to a psychologist because I didn't know what else to do. She told me she was going to do me a favor and not report it. I was pregnant with Oliver at the time, as I said, and she was doing me a favor as she looked down at my pregnant belly. That's when she said that. So that was prior to 2012 when mandatory reporting became a law. The challenge was I didn't know any better at the time, and I just followed her lead. Her response to our story at the time made me feel like I was overreacting when she said, I think this was a one-time only thing in reference to the sexual abuse. Against my better judgment, and by the way, this is the most embarrassing thing I will say in my life and definitely on this call, but against my better judgment at the time, I stayed in that marriage for another year. I never left Indigo alone with him again, but staying for any length of time remains my only regret in life. I should have made a better choice for Indy, for Oliver, and for myself. When I finally filed for divorce, I found the courage to call the police and report Indy's incident, even though it had been minimized the first time I reported. The officer asked me what I wanted her to do with that information. I figured she should know because I didn't, so I just said, I don't know, just document it, I guess. I'm going through a bad divorce, and I'm afraid he'll hurt us if he knows I've reported it. I don't feel like I was taken seriously because I was going through a divorce. Both the female psychologist and the female police officer had the opportunity to see me as a woman in distress. They could have taken charge professionally on my behalf, which would have yielded a different result, but neither did. After that, our domestic violence journey began. I felt like the male law enforcement officers didn't take me seriously either. They talked more about the status of my home renovation than how I could help myself. When I eventually filed for an injunction, the male judge initially denied my request, despite all my evidence and police reports. If it weren't for the help of an angelic woman who worked in the clerk's office, I wouldn't have gotten the help I needed. She spoke to the judge and got my request reversed and approved. When I finally made it to divorce court, my attorney advised me not to say anything about the sexual abuse because I'd potentially put Indy in harm's way at that time by staying and risked losing custody of both of my kids because of it. The result of that decision was that I've been forced to co-parent with my ex-husband for Oliver to this day. 17 years. The judge never knew he was a child molester, which was the reason for the divorce in the first place. In the final divorce judgment, that same judge extended Indigo's injunction until the age of majority, but looked down from his bench and said to me, "Do not waste this court's time coming back if the defendant is in your driveway or at a party and takes one step closer to you than he should." Those words shook me. He said it right in front of our abuser, which only empowered him to continue his abusive tactics to this day. As a woman, when you're repeatedly dismissed, it takes a great toll on your mental health. The final straw for me was after my aunt's embezzlement. I felt like I couldn't trust anyone at that point, and I became hopeless and eventually suicidal. Pause for crying. Believing victims and advocating for them can literally make the difference between life and death.
Thank you, Ms. Hansen, for sharing that. And I think you touch on a lot of important things that we just easily overlook or we dismiss. The emotional and just all of the aspects involved when you're, pregnant and trying to protect your child and trying to keep a family together and minimizing the victimization towards yourself. In order to do what you think is what the best for your family. And I couldn't imagine being in your shoes and in your position. And I want to turn quickly a little off a script to Attorney Cox, because you've represented, representing the state in matters like this, but certainly have, I'm sure, encountered similar situations where, maybe a defense, attorney saying, well, they never called the police until a year later, right? Oh, well, she did stay with him. All of those misconceptions that we have about victims and survivors of domestic violence and abuse. And what is your, it's a big question, not your resolve. I don't know how you resolve it, but what is your advice to the people who play parts in that system that sort of inflame these false ideas against women? And what is your advice to sort of neutralize that, or is it even possible to combat?
Well, it's tough, and we don't have, at least on the panel, a criminal defense attorney. But, just as I am the person who is advocating for the prosecution of someone who victimized a person, someone like Karen and her child, there's another side to that will be equally as, aggressive or in tune with where the attacks are that they can best use against our case. And so, I have to be honest in saying that when I'm assessing a case, I try to take out as best I can my emotions from it. I have to, because I have to look at what the evidence is. But to Justice Pariente's point, I'm always laser focused on the fact that this is a person. This is a real human. This is a life. There are ripple effects on both sides, depending on the decision that I make as the prosecutor. And I try to make sure I remember that. So I always tell people the hardest part of the job for me is when I have to tell a victim, someone like Karen, who I do believe has experienced some trauma, and something happened. It was bad. I wasn't there. But based on the evidence the information that I have, it might not be enough to meet our burden of beyond a reasonable doubt. But are there other ways that we can help? And my unit, the domestic violence unit that we have, we look at other things as far as making referrals to help get restraining orders, whether it's shelter, whether it's helping with childcare costs, whether it's reaching out on their behalf or helping them secure funds to relocate. If I cannot get justice for you in the courtroom through the criminal justice system, which I hope that we could, in most of our cases, that's our goal. That's what we want to get. But if we can't file those charges or proceed on them, what else looks like justice? What else can we do for you that can help you? And we've tried our best to be really, really good with identifying those other services that are available. But it's tough. It is tough when the evidence may not be as strong as we would like for it to be. And I often know that, sometimes it's really hard for women victims to get on that stand and look an abuser in the face, because a lot of women will tell me, well, I've done my part. I called the police. Why do you need me to come in and testify? And we have to explain to them, we have judges like Justice Pariente who they know the rules of evidence. We can't just play your statement. You got to come in and confront your accuser. They have a right to their constitutional right protects them, and their accuser has to come in and they get to confront them. So you have to come in, we have to get you on the stand. And sometimes that's really difficult for a lot of women to make peace with. And so we do our best with what we have, understanding that this is complicated, because when you're dealing with whether it's acquaintance cases, domestic violence cases, there's a relationship there, and there's a whole story in the lives of these people that are intertwined. It's not just that snapshot of the crime. There's a whole other story about their life. So getting to know the full story is what police don't get. That full story. They come out, they take your statement, they find out what happened. My job is to try to get the story behind the beginning to the end, to see, well, maybe there's more pieces that I can put together to this puzzle, to see if we can use some of that to get us to prosecution or to the finish line. But those are all the complicated things that most people don't understand about the work that we do. And it's, like Karen said, making sure we educate the public. That is the problem, or that is part of the issue, is making sure that the public understands, that victims understand clearly, what the limitations are for us and how much passion we have for those cases. And we want to do the best by people like Karen who have experienced those type of traumas.
Justice Pariente, did you want to add something? I'll take you off mute here.
Yeah, I
Maybe.
just want to say that you, Karen, are owed a huge apology. And by continuing to speak out, I know you didn't want to mention the judge or judges that did not hear you. It is, again, thinking about the training that is supposed to occur for every judge in the area of domestic violence. The fact that cases that are similar, so you have a domestic violence case and then you have a dissolution of marriage, it should be linked to the same judge. You know, if you had a complaint about a particular judge in the family division, you know, being able to go to the chief administrative judge to lodge a complaint. And you shouldn't let this rest, frankly. And because you have been harmed by the judicial system. And that is the last thing that the judiciary should be doing. And treating somebody with disrespect or demeaning them. And again, early on, I can tell you many male judges sort of had this, they were almost amused that you were a female lawyer. You know, you felt like you weren't being treated equally. But I would have thought, you know, in those, all these decades later, we'd have individuals that had the type of sensitivity to all the litigants, you know, whether they're a witness or, you know, or in the case. So, you know, we shouldn't let this drop as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to mention to folks for dropping questions into the Q&A. Thank you for doing that. Keep them coming. Our goal is at the end, in the last 10 minutes or so, we'll go through your questions and ask them. So please keep them coming. Attorney Cox, you know, the next question I have, I think at some point you chimed in on this in your last response. But I want to acknowledge that you're running to be the first woman and the first African American to serve as West Palm Beach County's top prosecutor, which is amazing. And so to pose this question to you, how does the intersection of gender with other identities, class, race, sexual orientation, how does that complicate the challenges that women face? And your perspective can be as, you know, looking at the clients that you, or the population that you serve, but also as a lawyer yourself, what your experiences, and also to piggyback off that, it's two-parter. What can we do to make a more sensitive approach to gender equality in the legal system when we have, you know, the intersection of class, race, all of these things affecting it?
Thank you for that question. And I'm very proud to be in this space, in this moment, on the precipice of making history in such an important position in our county, and to know that it's celebrated by women and African people, all different types of people are celebrating this moment with me. It makes me feel really good. So thank you for asking the question. I will say this. You know, the question that I had to ask myself when this opportunity presented itself is not, if not me, then who? You know, it's interesting when there has never been a first, so you don't have someone that you can, you know, ask about their experience or see how they did it or understand the barriers that you're going to be up against. You just don't know. And so you have to do it afraid, I think, and, you know, be courageous. And I think as women, we are so courageous. Sometimes we don't even know our own power. And I felt for myself being involved in organizations for women, as I have been for many years, and mentoring many women in all types of situations, especially single moms, as one of the mentoring groups I'm a part of. I always talk to them about, you know, not dimming their light, not shrinking when opportunities present themselves, you know, leaning in, you know, all those great self-help books we read as women. And then an opportunity came for me to kind of take my own advice and lean in myself and you know, stand up and say, hey, you know, I can do this. You know, we've never had someone who look like me to take that step, I can do it. If not me, then who? And so I took my own advice. And I think as women, that's what, these are not just fancy, mottos or words for us to use when we talk about leaning in and knowing our strength and the power of our voice and all those great things that we say. Well, we also have to put action behind them when opportunities come, because that's how you swing that door open for the next person and the next person after that. It's not about me, it's about who's next. And I'm very aware of that fact, that this is about more than just Alexcia. This is about our future and the future of our county and the future, quite frankly, of women, African-American women who look like me, who want to do the same thing that I'm doing. And so your other question, I think, was what is it that we can do? So I think we, as Justice Pariente mentioned, there are, we don't have an overwhelming number of women who are lawyers, but I know that we have less than 5% of lawyers in our country who are African American, less than 5%. So I'm a part of a small group, right? And so it's important to show up, every day, to show up and to keep encouraging others, mentoring others. As you climb, you also lift, you also pull other people along with you. And that's what I've done throughout my career, because I think it's important for us to show up in spaces and not shrink when opportunities come our way. And we just have to keep speaking up and letting the world hear our voices and know that just because we're women, we all think differently. We're not, monolithic at all. We have different experiences and perspectives, but at the end of the day, we share so many important values and experiences that it's important for conversations like this one, where we share a lot of similar experiences in our careers and our life stories. And so we have to come together and express these a little bit more, so that the next generation of women will understand what we went through, and they'll be able to, keep fighting this good fight and opening the door for more women after us.
I would just add that there are, in this group that you've got, if you're not part of the Florida Association for Women Lawyers, that's an important group. They're not political, of course. If you're from Palm Beach County, we've really had a group that's revitalized their advocacy, and especially supporting women with children. The other part is which has been amazing, is the Cherie Cunningham Women's Bar Association, which is, I'm a member of it, but it's primarily for Black women, and they're fabulous. And you don't have to necessarily be Black to join, but they have great programs themselves. And so I think those groups are important. I mean, when I first started practicing, we had women could fit into like a small room, but we talked to one another about our shared experiences, now, and we also had dialogues with judges. Now the bar and the bench, they get together, but it's like everybody. So there's not really that same chance to have smaller one-on-ones. And I think that's something that maybe we need to talk about, Alexcia, as far as trying to get that done, smaller groups, judges and lawyers talking to one another, and how to go about that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you and I had that noted on my paper, I think, for one of the other questions, to make sure I gave a plug to these wonderful bar associations we have for women: Cherie Davis Cunningham Bar Association, Florida Association for Women Lawyers. You don't even have to be a woman to join. You just have to be supportive of advancing women, or for the Cherie Davis Cunningham, be supportive of the advancement of Black women lawyers. That's the key. So thank you.
And I'm going to turn a question over to Ms. Hansen, but I just want to mention, I have Alexcia Cox-isms that I've been writing down: being here, not being heard, also hard work and heart work, and if not me, then who? I'm writing all of this down, and I think that I should maybe put these up somewhere when I wake up in the morning and say, this is a mantra. These are mantras.
Right. Thank you.
Quickly turning over to you, Ms. Hansen. I want to talk a little bit more about the systematic barriers that you encountered in your journey, and really understand from you what changes you think are necessary to make the legal system more accessible and equitable for women. And I tend to do this. I'm sorry, I ask a question and then I talk. I've always been a very talkative person. But what, Miss Attorney Cox had said, about experiences in the intersection of race and class with being a woman. I know you as well felt that you experienced, being an interior designer, being someone from Boca Raton, that those are things that also allowed people to make perceptions about you that maybe were not helpful to your case and your situation. So just to talk about those systematic barriers, also your experiences similar with those intersections, and what you think is necessary to change.
Well, I do think that all of those things play a factor. I mean, yes, if you, like for me, I was an interior designer, female, I don't feel like I was taken seriously. I think they thought I was a silly Boca woman, who lived in a gated community. So, and was going through a divorce. They didn't know I was the breadwinner of the household, by the way, but anyway, I think they thought the exact opposite. I also talk a lot, so I scripted everything I was going to say so I could stay on track. So to answer your question with what I pre-planned, I think judges should take a deeper look at domestic violence claims. As we've said, as the rest of the panel has said, we are not just a number or a case number. It takes a great deal of strength and courage to go to the courthouse, especially if you've never even been to a courthouse for anything, to announce your personal situation to a stranger, and then to fill out all of the paperwork properly. As a victim, you don't know what the judge needs to know to understand the gravity of your situation. No one is trained to be a good victim. Again, even if you have a college degree, you don't know this part of life because you never expected to be here. So we don't always explain ourselves the way we need to. We're explaining what we think is important, but it may not be what we need to tell all of you in order to advocate properly for us. So I think we need an advocate in the system when we're filling out the paperwork. My question in hindsight is, what did that clerk say to the judge to get him to change his mind? He'd already read all of my paperwork. What was so profound about what she said? He already knew my story. Whatever she said was important enough for him to change his mind. And with her guidance, maybe I would have gotten my request approved the first round, without her having to go back to him and ask him to reevaluate. When it comes to sexual abuse, I think the state attorney's office should take more cases, not just the easy ones. And I understand, to Alexia's point, that they have to have the evidence, to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. But I think more care and more care and concern, more listening, asking the right questions, I think all of that needs to come into play. I'm going to plug Alexcia here, but I think when she is the state attorney, I do think that will be taken more seriously from a female perspective, from a victim of domestic violence advocate perspective. So again, I think they should just take more cases, and not just the easy ones. I know everyone wants to have like the great statistics saying that they've prosecuted or put in jail or whatever, a certain percentage of people, but at least try the cases, make the victims feel like they're important. Just because the state attorney's office doesn't feel like they can win, that doesn't feel like a good enough reason when it's your family member or yourself who is the victim. They should find a way to navigate it better. Like I said, just asking different questions, getting the information out of us that they need in order to move the case forward. Otherwise, the predator ends up with more freedoms than the victim. That's how it feels, for sure. And then with rape cases, victims need better legislation and more support in general. For example, for 2 years in a row, I advocated for legislation to give victims anonymity with a civil case as recourse for organizations like universities who might blackmail students. I'm using the word blackmail. I don't know if that's the correct legal term, but to blackmail them to keep quiet, you know, to remain silent about their case. Because it would be to the university's detriment if a student came forward with a rape case. That legislation failed to pass in the state of Florida both years that it was presented. I'm still a little bit bitter about it, to be honest, but we're going to try again, hopefully. And then with embezzlement cases, I think we either need better legislation there, and I'm not as well versed on embezzlement legislation because my focus has been on sexual abuse and domestic violence cases. But I think either we need better legislation for embezzlement or we need more aggressive law enforcement with the legislation that we already have. And I don't know what the right answer to that is because I haven't looked into that legislation, to be honest.
I've got a comment on this because I'm looking on, you know, because I know this is statewide, but in Palm Beach County, there is if you go on the 15th Judicial Circuit website, they have a domestic violence checklist. They have, and then they have resources and includes, and I know there's at least one legal aid society member on this call from Palm Beach County. There is, in the Legal Aid Society of Palm Beach County, they will assist all victims of domestic violence. So I'm not sure, you know, how you fell through those cracks, because for years, I'd say, you know, the whole time that I was on the Supreme Court, we were especially sensitive to these issues. And so yours is certainly a lesson in how, you know, somebody who is knowledgeable and advocating can still experience a miscarriage of justice. But it does look like there are things in place. And again, if you had a particularly bad experience with one judge, that, in my view, should have been reported. We know there are judges that should probably never be a judge, but never be in divisions that are going to be handling things like that, you know, child abuse, all those different types of issues.
I would like to speak to that really quickly. My case was in 2009, so the domestic violence part of that. So I don't know what was available at the time, but I guess kind of ridiculous thing about being a victim of domestic violence is that you don't necessarily know you are one when you're in it. Anyone from the outside looking in is like, well, obviously that is domestic violence. When you're in it, living it, you don't necessarily know that that's what you are. You don't know you fall into that classification. So to go Google what to do when you're a victim of domestic violence, when you don't even know you are one, you don't think to Google that. And then when the officers are telling you eventually, you know, the way my case happened is one officer finally said to me on their about 6th visit to my house, you know, we could help you if you got an injunction. And I said, what's an injunction? He said, well, it's the same thing as a restraining order. And I'm like, well, how do you get that? And he's like, well, you need to go to the courthouse. Which courthouse? I mean, I'm asking the dumbest questions because I have no idea. I can design a hospital operating room, but I don't know what an injunction is or how to get one. So he said, you know, go to the Delray courthouse. So I did. The community maybe now knows more, but certainly then I had no idea. Like, that's why I say people don't know how to be a good victim. Being a good victim would be that you would know to go Google it. You would be prepared. You would have a checklist. I love a good checklist. I had no idea what to do. I couldn't even rationalize that I was a victim of domestic violence to even figure out what the next step was until he handed me the brochure that said domestic violence on it. I was like, oh, okay. So, and then I just followed what he said. I didn't go Google anything. I just followed exactly the steps that he said to do. But if it were not for him, I don't know how everything else would have turned out. And when I speak to law enforcement, I always tell them, instead of returning to the house 6 times, tell these people on the first round, tell them they're a victim of domestic violence, hand them a brochure, tell them what an injunction is, tell them how to get one. You're saving yourself steps, you're saving yourself frustration from dealing with the same people over and over. You're saving taxpayers money because you don't have to show up, and you're keeping yourself safer because you have less of a chance of getting shot being in a bad situation. So it's a win-win-win. So I understand your point, and I think it's a great one, but I don't know how to solve that if people don't even know that they are in the situation to begin with.
Alexis, if I may,
Yeah.
so two things. First is that, yes, there are, and Justice Pariente hit the nail on the head. We have an immense amount of domestic violence, sexual assault violence resources here in Palm Beach County. And I don't say that as someone who's in the bubble. I say that because we actually had, it was a federal grant, a grant program, and they looked at Palm Beach County as well as other counties around the state or around the country. And Palm Beach County was seen as favorable in terms of how many wraparound services we have available for victims who are from the start of the case, from the prosecution in, I'm sorry, the police investigation in, prosecution in, as well as all the way out in terms of community services that are available. We were given a huge thumbs up in terms of what we're doing in comparison to places, jurisdictions around the country. So we know that we have it here. And we see the numbers that show, that we are helping victims, or moving the needle. We've seen decreased amounts of domestic violence in our communities. However, getting the information out to the public, to the people, I think that is where we might struggle, especially when you're in a very traumatic situation. And if it's the first time, you don't know where to go and how to get that information. At the courthouses, there are our Palm Beach County Victim Services. They help people do just that, which is write up and collect the information, the police reports, the data to communicate to a judge. They're trained to help you communicate your specific instance of domestic violence or sexual assault violence to a judge so that you can hopefully get a favorable outcome. But many people don't know that. And that's what we have to work on, making sure that before someone actually becomes a victim, that information is widespread across our county. And we can always work on that. I wanted to also just highlight the point that you made, Karen, and hey, I'm a prosecutor through and through. I support, the work of the people in my office. No office is perfect. No one is perfect, and no office is expected to be perfect. But I will say this, when a prosecutor's ethical obligation, if you will, is to pursue those cases where there's a reasonable likelihood of success, a reasonable likelihood of successful prosecution. We try to stick with that for a range of reasons. And I know to the general public, especially when something terrible has happened to you or your family, it feels as though, or it might be perceived as though what we want to do is only take those cases that seem like an easy win. But I can assure people, and I want to make sure it's clear for people who are listening in, that's not the threshold for us. It's like, oh, well, this is a winner, because we take tough cases day in and day out. And I understand when people walk away with the perception because their specific case might not be able to be prosecuted. And it's important that we take the time to explain that to them. I almost think of prosecutors and police officers as customer service agents, if you will, because when something really bad happens, you appreciate the person that will take the time to really explain it to you so that you walk away with a full understanding of why. And we have to work on that. And I think that maybe if that was there at the time of your situation, maybe your perception wouldn't be, as it is now. And I want to make sure that going into the future, we do more of that, to make sure that you walk away understanding the why, so that if there's something that happens in the future, or if you have to share your perspective or your experience with other people, it'll be one that's more positive.
Absolutely. As I'm an attorney as well, and there is a bedside manner, right, that you should employ as an attorney, because, customer service or not, however you want to call it, you are serving people, and people they need, especially in the criminal justice system, whether it's on the defense side where people are facing years or their life in prison, or on the side of victims and survivors who maybe can't be helped, everybody deserves to have things explained. That's your job as a lawyer. But I digress. I wanted to turn over to Justice Pariente and ask, I know you've shared some challenges that you face on the bench, but were there any unique challenges as a woman that you face on the bench that you wanted to share? And then a two-parter again. And what advice would you have to young women lawyers coming in on how to navigate gender bias and how to overcome?
That's in 3 minutes or less. Basically, by the time I became a judge, I was a litigator for almost 20 years. I have after law school, so I had that experience mostly as a civil trial lawyer. And then I was appointed to the appellate court, and I started to learn much more about the legal system. And I think one of the things for judges is that they come from sometimes very narrow backgrounds. And again, there's nothing wrong with someone being an assistant state attorney, but seems to me that this governor is very much likes to appoint someone that's been assistant state attorney, thinking that they're going to be I don't know, not sensitive to other issues. So I think that it is, I just forgot the question. What was the question?
The question was, any advice to unique challenges that you've experienced and any advice to young women lawyers coming in?
Yeah, so I think for young lawyers coming in, women lawyers, what I said before is getting involved in court committees of the Palm Beach County Bar, if you're Palm Beach County, or of the Florida Bar, getting involved in organizations that are such as women lawyer organizations, and becoming seeking out a mentor. Here we are, and you have an issue, you can, you can email to Alexcia, or, but really to people that are, may have that kind of experience for you. And so seeking out a mentor or mentoring, I think, is really important. My husband and I, we have a grandson who's just become an associate in a law firm in Palm Beach County, and he keeps on texting questions to us. So I guess we're being his mentor. But really, having that, getting involved in young lawyers types of activities, if you're a young lawyer, other than just some social hour where you're going to be there, socially drinking or whatever, but having some really important discussions. And, I don't think there's any substitute for just working your hardest and doing your best. Whether you feel like you're starting from behind, it was what we always used to say to young lawyers advocating: preparation, preparation, preparation. That's the most important thing that you can do as a lawyer. And if you're a lawyer and you're thinking, how do I become a judge? My advice is always just be the very best lawyer you can be. Just don't think, well, you just out of law school and now I want to become a judge. It's a process. And even though you can be a judge at county judge 5 years, appellate circuit judge at 10, I believe it takes more time to understand and understand that, as I'll say it again and again, that we have real people that we're really helping, but we can also hurt them. And here you have Karen as just this excellent example.
And Attorney Cox, can you add anything to that advice to young women lawyers coming in and wanting to neutralize any gender bias and overcome?
Yeah, I would say, continue showing up. There are still a lot of firms that, at least that I've seen, that, are male heavy, partners. You might be the only woman in a firm, even today in 2024. You know, it's hard for some people to believe that we've never had a female service state attorney in Palm Beach County in 2024. So there's still a lot of glass ceilings to be shattered. And I tell people, you know, the reason why it's not a glass window or a glass door is because in order to shatter a ceiling, it's high, and you need other people to push you up, to support you. You gotta be able to reach it. And in order to do that, it's other women, I think, and men who understand that women need that support in spaces like this, in the legal profession. You gotta be elevated by someone. Someone has to help you reach that ceiling so that you can break through it. And it's really important for women and the men who support what we're trying to do to band together and to help. And I think that's what's most important, finding and identifying your people, whether it's a mentor, whether it's, you know, friends. We all need someone to help us reach our greatest potential. In addition to that, I think you have to be intentional about your networking. I'm always telling young lawyers, you know, networking is important. For me as a young lawyer, I was very involved. And as a prosecutor, you don't see a lot of prosecutors really involved in Florida Bar. I mean, I was chair of our professional ethics committee of the Florida Bar, and people are, well, nope, a lot of prosecutors don't get involved. Why? Because maybe we don't really stress it, or maybe we don't put an emphasis on the importance of it. But to me, it was really important to be a prosecutor in significant bar service. My local bar, my Florida bar, getting involved in ends of court, because that's where you meet people, and it's a level playing field. Judges are your committee members. You get to talk to them and get to know them. They get to know you. And I think that really sets you up for success as a legal practitioner, regardless of your practice area. Being intentional about selecting mentors. I would go on LinkedIn, and if I saw someone that I felt I saw something that they posted that seemed of interest to me, or I heard them speak on a panel, I don't care if they lived in Texas, I would reach out to them and say, hi, I saw what you said. I thought it was really great. I would love a conversation with you, maybe 5 minutes. And you'd be surprised how many people who I've been able to just meet with and learn from, just by taking that step to develop myself more professionally. And it's important to do it, even if you're a shy person, which I am, you know, but to just put yourself out there to say, hey, I want to get to know you. I want to connect to you. Every time I would get a business card, I would email the person. I would try to do it within 24 hours, at the most 48 hours, to introduce myself, to say it wasn't a waste of your time for you to meet me and give me your card. I didn't throw it in the trash can. I would love 5 minutes to have coffee, or just to chat with you, and hopefully you'll remember me. And I think that's what we have to do as women who are intentional about our careers and our success. We have to stick together, and we have to make sure that we are intentional about connecting to the right people.
And, you know,
I think it's so important to now know we're going to have our first African-American president of the Florida Bar, in Saya Baker Barnes. And that's, I mean, we have had women as bar presidents, but this is one more leap. We may, hopefully, from my point of view, have the first woman as well as Black president of the United States. And this year could be a sea change, and first, not only Black state attorney, but first female state attorney in Palm Beach County as of this election coming up. And there are other important elections, of course, including for U.S. Senate. You know, I think that would be one other thing to say. Make sure you network and make sure people are registered to vote, and vote, you know, in November. We can't complain, especially with young people. You know, they go, you know, I don't want to, you know, I don't want to get involved. So at least just vote.
absolutely. I echo all of that. I want to turn, my plan is to turn one more question over to Ms. Hansen, if we have a second for like a rapid fire 1 or 2 questions, and then to take in some of the questions that came in through the Q&A, because we actually did receive 7, and so we can try to process those in the last 10 minutes. So the question I want to pose to you, Ms. Hansen, is to please tell us about your organization, the Collective Projects. I know it evolved out of your experiences and is something that you're incredibly passionate about. And we thank you for being here and sharing your story and what you do with that here. So please tell us about your organization. And more importantly, please tell us as lawyers how we can collaborate with you and how we can better support women like you navigating legal challenges and do it better.
Thank you for that. I want to start by saying that I feel like truly, if any of these things had happened to my child or to myself in 2024 versus when they happened in 2009, in Palm Beach County, things would be very different for me now versus then. And I want to give a shout out to Senator Lauren Book, Senator Berman, and Senator Representative Bartleman in particular, because they've done tons of work for advocacy for victims of sexual abuse and domestic violence. So I am grateful to them for that. And also to the local Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. They have brought me in for trauma-informed training. So they are doing a lot of work, to Alexia's point, to educate law enforcement officers on how better to deal with victims. So I do think there are a lot of changes that have been made. So I'm speaking, everything I said before was on behalf of 2009 Karen Hansen. And, like I said, if it happened now, it would be very different. But anyway, I started the Collective Projects as kind of a home base for my advocacy work. My personal mission is to leave the world a better place than I found it. And the mission of the Collective Projects ties into that. My mission is to educate and to create awareness by sharing my personal story in order to prevent domestic and sexual violence. I've done that through victims' rights legislation, as I said, through speaking engagements, and I'll continue to share all of that information and more details of my story with my upcoming autobiography, if I ever finish it. I want to empower victims and survivors to hold their predators accountable for their actions instead of blaming themselves. And I mean that privately just as much as publicly. It doesn't mean they have to come forward or even press charges if they're not ready to do that. But personally, I hope they hold their predators accountable instead of holding themselves accountable. I think that's really important for healing. The Collective Projects website is a landing place for law enforcement and the legal community and higher education institutions to read about my story and to connect with me, to collaborate on speaking engagements, legislation, or other projects where they think my story might be beneficial. I will literally talk to anyone who will listen, as you could probably tell. And I feel like organizations like mine just need more airtime with a lot of different groups of people. The more people hear stories like mine, the less they'll be able to turn away from them and ignore them like it's not happening. So that's the soapbox speech.
It's perfect. Thank you so much, Ms. Hansen. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn over to the Q&A. We have 10 minutes left and I'd rather not rush through it. I don't know if I want to start hardball or softball. I think I'll start first with this question in the Q&A that came in. I think it can be posed to Justice Pariente. And you talked about it a little bit in one of your responses. How do we overcome the inherent bias of politically appointed judges, right? I think that's a great question. I know we talked about training and that might be the answer, but it's, when you have this, factor of you don't get to pick who the judge is, how do you deal with that?
Right. I think that's a very, it's a difficult question because right now of the way that judges in Florida are being appointed, the Federalist Society has had an outsized role, and I don't think that they are as concerned about issues that I think are critical: family law issues, and of course, domestic violence issues. And if you don't, when Governor Bush was in office, I remember I was Chief Justice, I think, during that time, And I would say to him, when you're looking to appoint judges, ask about their experience in the family court or in, for issues like domestic violence, because we tend to look and say, oh, they were a litigator, because, everything is, and I was a civil trial litigator, but the other experiences are very important. The other thing that is disconcerting, and something that now really is up to each circuit, is after this governor has stopped any programs that are called DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, the Florida bar, based on the Supreme Court's direction, has had to eliminate its DEI. So locally, within circuits, it's more important than ever to have that kind of training about inherent biases that judges have. I mean, they may not even be aware of it, but how you train for that is critical. So I guess those are a couple of things that I think are very important.
Thank you. The next question I want to pose from the audience is towards Ms. Hansen. And it's an interesting question, and as an attorney, that the perspective, the person asks, do you think it's more harmful or hurtful to go through the court process and then be denied, whether it be an injunction or, a criminal case? Or is it better for an attorney to advise that it wouldn't meet the statutory requirements before being filed? In short, is it worse to lose in court or better to not go through that process at all? And you are the only person on here who has had that experience of going through that process. So
yeah, I think that's a great question. And of all of the times I've ever spoken, I've never heard this question before. So I have to sleep on it. But my initial response is, I would rather take my chances in front of a judge or a jury, whatever the case is, and potentially lose there. It hurts either way. When you feel like you haven't been heard at all, like to even get in front of a judge, I feel like that's harmful. But it's also hard to hear, as Alexcia and I were saying before, you have to meet a certain requirement to even get in front of a judge. That's hard too, because you still don't feel heard to even get your day in court. So I don't know what the right answer to that is. It probably depends on the individual. For me, I know for sure that I felt more heard, at least being able to get to the courthouse, fill out the paperwork, finally get, the injunction approved, and then to be able to say all of these things in front of the judge. So I feel it's better to go to court, but you could ask 10 different survivors or victims and they probably all have different answers, to be honest. I think it's very personal. A lot of people don't have the strength to go to court either. So I think you have to read the room and know your client, and whether you think they can handle going, it's difficult to get on the stand. So can they handle that and actually advocate for themselves on the stand?
Right. Softball question. This is for Alexcia, for Attorney Cox. It says, when you win and become the state attorney, are you going to incorporate in-house CLE training for new hires or team up with maybe the public defender's office to deal with issues of bias of all kinds?
Yeah, it's important to note that I think it was, I'm not sure what year that was, maybe a year or two ago. It was during the pandemic. My boss was gracious enough to allow me to conduct an implicit bias training in-house. And so I put it together and presented it, to the attorneys and staff in our office. And it was well received. So I definitely am in support of implicit bias conversations, trainings. And implicit bias isn't limited, of course, to race and gender. There are a range of things, even in just how we process cases, names of people, voices on the phone, and a lot of things play when you're talking about bias. And so I don't want to limit it. Of course, I would never limit it to just race or just gender, because it's just important when you have the conversation that you're aware of thoughts that might enter your mind. And I think that's important when you are dealing with when you're in a position of power, like a state attorney's office.
Absolutely. So I have one more question that I'll take from the Q&A, and all three of you can answer, or if you don't want to answer, that's okay. And then I will turn it back over to, I think, either Jennifer or Jorge for some final closing. But the last question that we'll take from the Q&A here is also a two-parter. You know, I seem to like two-parters. It's, in your opinion, what are the key milestones that we must collectively achieve to move closer to establishing a truly gender equal legal system? And how can we ensure those milestones are sustainable? And whoever would like to take it first.
I think you'll find that when we look at the statistics, and I haven't looked recently, there's far more gender equality in, the public defender's office, state attorney's offices, legal aid, where I would say the salaries are also lower, and there's probably more acceptance of maternity leave, those kinds of things. And so to achieve true equality, we need our firms, small and large, to also understand the importance of child rearing being not something that sets you back as on the partner check or wherever, or in compensation, but as something to be embraced. And so so it is really an overview of each part, public interest as well as private interest, and continuing the important discussions that must be had both within the firm and within the Florida bar. And there's more of a challenge because you can't call it DEI training, right, for law firms. So I think that has to happen. And women, just what Alexcia, Karen, you've got to be, as an attorney, your own advocate. Don't wait for somebody to ask you to go to this next position. No one asked me to become a judge. I decided this was something I wanted to do. So advocate for yourself. And that's, I guess that would be my advice.
All right. With 2 minutes left, Ms. Hansen, Attorney Cox, was there anything that you also wanted to add to that answer in response to that question?
I think that was a great answer. And I don't really have much to add, because I think it's, I think Justice Pariente summed it up quite well. Thank you.
Awesome. Awesome. Ms. Hansen, were you going to say something?
The only thing I would add is that I think we just need like more specific legislation when it comes to things that impact more women, like sexual abuse and domestic violence, more protections for victims. So I think we need to close loopholes on some of the legislation that is already out there. So that's it.
Awesome. Well, we are 2 minutes left. I can't believe this was right on time. I can turn it back over. Jennifer, did you want to hop back on to say anything in closing?
Hi. Yes, I just wanted to again thank all of our panelists for their time and for sharing everything that they had to share. Alexis, thank you so much for your great moderation. It was wonderful. I hope that everyone found this webinar valuable. There's info that was posted in the chat, so you will receive an email with a copy to the link as well as the CLE code. But I'm going to give you the code now anyway, just in case you want to write it down. So the code is 240795. 9N. So again, everything will be sent to you, follow up in an email. I included a link to the Women's Foundation in the chat as well. So, please feel free to peruse our website and be in touch with us. So thank you again, everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for sharing this platform, for all that you do, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.